Okay, this video I'm going to be showing how to make a finishing wire. This is an 016 by 022 Elgiloy, which is one example of a rectangular finishing wire, and this might be used in phase 1. I'll show that on the phase 1 typodont. I would also do this same type of wire in a 1725 steel. 1825 starts to get a little bit stiff. I tend to finish in Elgiloy, unheat treated, and so that's what I'm going to use here today. So when you're starting, you're going to be using your bird beak, and I just start with one long length of wire. They actually come in a tube that's double this length, and we just cut them in half and store them that way. So the first thing you're going to do is be bending an omega loop. You're going to be using the wire with the broader side facing toward you and your round bird beak end to start the loop. I measure a little bit in from the end of the wire. I'd rather have too much on this end than not enough to make the loop. And this is going to form the left side. I'm right-handed, so I always start working left to right. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the wire all the way around and then move my bird beak. So now I'm grasping like this and then bending the wire around. I'm going to start to form that omega loop. And then once it looks about like that, now we're going to grab it from the inside loop and use that same curved end to start to make the second leg. And at this point I usually just refine the position of the loop. What I use these for is to tie back from the molar to the loop. So I want to have that defined loop end toward the mesial of the wire. It doesn't matter to me too much what this end looks like. It can be more curved if you need more length on the wire later. To me it's fine if it goes straight up and down like that. And I just check it in all dimensions to make sure that the loop is pretty much in the same plane as the rest of the wire. Okay, and my legs are pretty much even. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is get our turret. And a lot of turrets have different lines. The lines on this end, they put torque in the wire. We don't need any torque for this wire, so we're going to use the 0 degree. And my turret's marked, this is pretty old, so it's marked 0 degrees, 7, 10. I really only use the 0. I put torque in by hand, but your turret might be marked differently. So we're going to be spinning the wire into an arch form, and as I said before, this loop is going to be on my left. If I'm going to be doing an upper wire, the loop is going to be facing up, and so when you spin it, you want to be conscious of which direction you're spinning it, because if it'll be different if you're doing an upper or a lower. So this is going to be an upper wire. I'm going to lay the wire in like this. So the loop now is facing down toward my finger. I hold it here with my left finger while I put that long rod over the wire, and that kind of locks it in. Okay, now while holding this finger in place, we're going to go ahead and spin the turret, and you just kind of march it along. So I'm going to hold it here with my thumb, and I'm going to move to the next section and then spin it more. And I just keep moving until I know I have enough to get around to about the buy on the opposite side. And then you can release it from the turret. So you want to be a little overspun on your turning. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little bit of work by hand, back with the bird beak again. And I'm just going to start to make this look more like a normal arch form. So I want this side to be a little bit straighter. I want to imagine where my anterior teeth are, and then a little bit straighter going into the buccal segment on the opposite side. And again, I'm using the round end of the bird beak on the interior part for the most part. Okay, so just kind of forming this. You can see how this side's a little straighter now. You can do some of this by hand, just opening up your loop, and then doing the same thing on this side, just kind of walking it around. And then pretty quickly you have a more normal shaped arch form. So at this stage now I'm going to measure the wire. I'm going to be using this phase 1 typodont. It just has some old brackets on it, bands on the 6s with some brackets, 4 anterior brackets. And it already has a wire in there. So if you were doing this on a patient, you would take out their current wire. And as long as you're including all the same teeth, you know approximately the length that you already have, and that's a good place to start guessing. So I have that existing wire, and I'm just going to lay it on top of the wire that I'm working on. I like to line up the end and imagine where the 6 ends up, because the loop is going to be just in front of the 6. So I kind of line it up like this, and I just grab it. And then I just hold the 2 wires together and pinch them together with my fingers and bring it over to the other side. And now I can imagine this is somewhere inside the tube on the 6. And what I really don't want to do after I've spent all this time making the wire is leave it short. So I imagine extra wire for the 6, extra wire for the loop, and then a little extra. So I'm going to cut it somewhere right about here. Let's grab my cutter. Okay, extra wire for the 6, extra wire for the loop, and then a little extra. So I'm just going to cut it right there. Okay, so now I'm done measuring it. And now on this side, I don't really need all this extra wire. I just need it long enough to go into the 6. Since brackets are different, you have to judge based on the bracket that you're using, but I usually cut it about here. Leave some extra. You can always trim this, but you just want it to be comfortable when you're trying it in and out of the mouth. Okay, so we're getting very close to where we can try it in for the patient. So this wire, if you just tried it in right now, this would be pokey because we know it's extra long on that side. So what I like to do is just curl it around to make it more comfortable for the patient so it doesn't poke him in the cheek. So I'm just going to take my bird beak again. I'm going to grab it right toward the end of the wire, and I'm just going to spin a nice, wide, easy loop. You don't want any permanent kinks in the wire. So you're just coiling it up so you keep all of your length, but you keep it out of the way so it won't poke the patient. Now the last thing I want to do before I try it in the mouth is this loop right now is very vertical, but in the mouth you can't allow the loop to be vertical. It has to actually bend outward slightly toward the cheek because otherwise it will rub against the gingiva, and it can also be a food trap. So there's this balance. You want the loop to be a little bit toward the cheek but not out so much that it pokes the cheek, and you don't want it so close to the gums that you can't clean around it. So the way that you adjust the loop is you're going to be, again, using your bird beak, and you just put it right in front of where the omega loop ends. Okay, so you're just grabbing the wire right in front. And now this is going to require 2 hands because we've got to apply torque to the loop. So I'm going to grab it here, and then I always just carefully switch hands. So you're using your right hand if you're like me, and then you're going to grab the loop like this and hold it. And now you need your tweed plier. So you're going to be holding it there with your bird beak just in front, and then you're going to use the tweed plier to grab the entire loop, and then you're going to bend it the direction you want it to go. So I'm just going to tilt it outward some, and you can maybe appreciate the angle change on that. So now you've torqued the loop, but you've also torqued that whole back segment where the 6s go. So now you've got to de-torque the 6. So you just come now to the other side of the loop, grab it with your bird beak again, and now you're going to go back with your tweed plier and apply the exact same movement, not the opposite. So you bend the loop again towards the cheek. Now what you've achieved is the wire mesial to the loop is the same torque as the wire in the 6, and just the loop has come toward the buckle. Okay, now whenever you torque something, it often changes other things. So now we just go back and we make sure everything is in the same plane of space. So I'm just going to clean up everything a little bit, check the legs on my loop, make sure we don't have any new movements that we've created. Okay, so this looks about right. I'm going to shorten this just a little bit. It's a little bit long for my brackets. Okay, so the next step would be to try this in. So let's get our typodont. Again, if this is the patient, I start always on the left side because I'm sitting on the right side of the chair, and I just find that it's easier to see. So we're going to be inserting the wire into the bracket on the 6. And you should see that your loop sits right up against the 6 or just slightly mesial. You can leave a small gap there. If you're actually using this loop for space closure, you might want to leave even more room, but that's appropriate for a finishing wire. So now I just kind of pinch this wire with my finger as I move around to the other side. So I'm going to slip it into the 2 bracket and across the incisors, and I want it to go all the way into the bracket. I want this to fit as intimately as I can as I'm getting the sizing. So I'm going to let it sit all the way in there. And now what I'm looking is how long does this wire need to be and where does my loop need to be positioned. If I imagine the loop is going to take up some space here, I need to grab the wire now with my bird beak, the place where I want the loop to start, leaving room to finish the loop. It's pretty annoying when your loop is too long and then you've got all this extra wire out here, and now you've got to introduce other changes in order to make it fit. So this definitely takes practice, but basically I'm going to grab it right about here. And when I'm taking this out of a patient's mouth, sometimes it kind of gets stuck. So all I do is I let go and I just keep my bird beak on there and I bend it slightly. That just tells me where my loop's supposed to start. Now I can let it go, but I can see the starting spot for the loop. So now I don't care about anything else. I'm just going to take it out gently and then leave the patient's mouth. Okay, so now remember where you are. This is going to be the patient's right. We want the loop to point this way. So I'm going to grab the wire right where I started that bend. Again, round end of the bird beak is going to be the end that we use to form the loop. And we're going to bend the wire back to the mesial. Grab the loop now on the interior with the round end here. And then curve the wire around and just move my bird beak. Okay, so we're closing the omega basically. Okay, and now I'm going to grab it from the exterior and make the back leg. Okay, and then just as I did on the other side, now you just spend a little time cleaning up your loop. You can pinch it if it's too wide. You want to get the legs even. And you've got all this extra wire here that we had coiled up. If the coiled up part is too close to the loop, you just kind of want to bend it, get rid of any kinks, make sure it's nice and straight. Get pretty good at guessing after a while. So if you just look at that wire, looks kind of cockeyed right now. The shape's all off. But we know that this is the mesial to 6 and this is the mesial to 6. So now you just make your arch form look symmetrical. We're done with all this extra wire. You can cut it off. And now using my burr beak again, I'm just going to clean up the shape some. So I'm still using the round end on the interior part of the wire. And just kind of walking it along, changing the shape. Okay, you can use your fingers. So pretty soon now you have it looking about appropriate, more symmetrical of an arch form. You got your loops right about where you want them to be. The tails are looking pretty symmetrical at about the length of our bracket. Okay, so remember we torqued this side. Now we got to torque this loop because as you can see, if you just put it in right now, the loop would be toward the gingiva. So we'll go back to using our 2 hands. I'm going to grab the loop, just mesial, and see how sometimes just to get in the right spot to be able to hold the wire easily, I'm using my instrument on the interior of the arch right now. And then carefully switch hands. And now I'm taking my tweed plier. I'm going to grab both legs of the loop. Oops, a little too close. Okay, grab both legs of the loop, and I'm just going to bend that outward. And now we've got to detorque the 6. So I'm going to grab it on the other side, grab both legs of the loop, back to the buckle again. So always go the same direction that you went before. Now the torque should be good, but remember sometimes other things change when you adjust torques. So we go back and we clean up the loop again. Make sure the legs are in line with each other this way. Make sure they're in line this way. Adjust that guy a little bit. I'm just constantly looking at the wire from different angles. Okay, so now it's time to go back in the mouth again. Your length should be just right. If you have mismeasured, like for example, if you had this loop right up against the 6 and you mismeasured here, you're going to have too much arch length here and it's going to stick out in front of your brackets. If you had this wire way forward of the 6 when you measured over here, you could end up quite short. So when you're first learning, it's better to leave more length on this back part because it gives you a little wiggle room. Okay, if you make this part too long, you just have to introduce a bump somewhere. So for example, I could create a little V-bend or something, just some way of using up wire. And that way you don't have to remake the whole thing. Okay, so back to the mouth. Turn upside down, patient. Okay, so we're going to slip this back in. Get in there, wire. All right, and then back over into our brackets. And in this side. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. Length is nice right up against the 6 there. Length is nice here, fitting in our anterior teeth. And I like to have it reasonably close to the buccal surface of the teeth. If it's way out, it'll bother their cheeks. Again, it's a phase 1 typodont, so these teeth are not all bracketed. But if you did have brackets, then you just have to, again, lie it along the brackets and then position that loop so it's quite close to the 6 because otherwise it'll be in the way of the 5. The next thing I do before I'm done with this wire is I mark it. It's always great if when you take a finishing wire out, you don't have to keep trying it in and out, in and out. It's pretty annoying. So we just use a standard file, and when I mark the midline, I put 3 small slashes. That way when I take it out, I know that's the midline. And then in between any other teeth, I just put 1 slash. So you just mark it 1, 2, 3, 1, and then I'm going to mark the distal of the 2 here, and then here, and distal of the 2 here. So if you had brackets on these teeth, you would just mark in between each one. You don't need to mark where the loop is because you've got the loop. All right, and then it comes out again. And since I know now where all those marks are, I can also coordinate the wire a little bit more carefully. So I just have to find, it's not easy to see on this video, but find your mark. Let's say it's about here. And now you know that's about where your cuspid offset would be, so you can create a little bit more firm definition to your arch form if you are working with cuspid offsets, which I do on a lot of my finishing wires. So you can build those in now because you have a mark that tells you where every tooth is. If you're working on a wire template or you're basing it on a pre-treatment model to maintain intercuspid width, then you could take these 2 marks and line it on your template, and then you could measure and make sure that you're not expanding the cuspids, for example. Okay, and then one more time before I put it in, I'm just checking all dimensions. My flat in this plane of space, is my arch form symmetrical? are my loops bent out enough? If they were impinging on the gums, then I just re-torque the loop out a little bit. The nice thing about these loops is when they go up against the 6, you can actually tie an elastic there and it will cinch the loop right up to the 6 and it will keep the wire from popping out, but it will also maintain arch length, so now you don't need a power chain. So it's a pretty nice versatile finishing wire.